At the gala celebrating his billion-dollar acquisition, Megan tried to kiss her husband while they danced under chandeliers that cost more than most homes. He shoved her away, pregnant belly and all, and announced to 300 guests, "I'd rather kiss a dog than touch you." The crowd erupted in laughter. Then he added, "You're an embarrassment. Get out of my sight." The laughter grew deafening. She stood there, 6 months pregnant with his child, and smiled like her heart wasn't shattering. But when she finally spoke, the ballroom fell silent. Some insults bruise. Hers destroyed empires. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to our stories. May strength find you in every moment of doubt. May courage rise when the world tries to break you. And may your voice never be silenced by those who fear your power. May every woman know her worth is not measured by the cruelty of others. And may every person who has been humiliated find the fire to rise again. Your pain has purpose, your story matters, and the universe itself conspires to lift you higher. If your heart believes in justice, like this video. If you stand with those who refuse to be broken, right? I am here for truth. Some cages are built from platinum credit cards. Megan Engler stood beneath the vaulted ceiling of the Metropolitan Ballroom, watching light dance off champagne flutes that cost more than her childhood home. The orchestra played something classical and forgettable, while James accepted congratulations for acquiring Technova Industries, his latest conquest in a war he waged against obscurity. Around her, women dripped in diamonds, whispered behind jeweled hands, their eyes tracking Megan's swollen belly like it was a stain on expensive fabric. "She's really showing now, isn't she?" James's business partner's wife said, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "I suppose desperation has a certain charm. Some women will do anything to secure the bag." Polite laughter followed, the kind that sounds refined but cuts like broken glass. Megan adjusted the strap of her gown, a designer piece James had purchased without asking her size, her preference, or her opinion. 6 months into carrying his child, and he had stopped seeing her as anything but an accessory that no longer fit the aesthetic. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her smile locked in place, her breathing controlled, despite the tightness in her chest. 3 years of marriage had taught her how to survive in hostile territory. Stand tall. Never show weakness. Swallow the pain until you forget it's there. "Megan, darling, you look positively exhausted." James's mother appeared beside her, glass of wine in hand, expression dripping with concern that never reached her eyes. "Perhaps you should rest in the lounge. We wouldn't want you to overexert yourself in your condition." Translation: "You're ruining the photos. Disappear." Megan had learned to speak fluent Dooley, that particular dialect where every kindness concealed a knife. James's mother, Patricia Dooley, ruled the family with the precision of a general and the warmth of permafrost. She had opposed the marriage from the beginning, viewing Megan as a threat to the dynasty she had spent decades building. Now, with a grandchild on the way, Patricia's hostility had evolved from passive resistance to active sabotage. "I'm fine, Patricia. Thank you for your concern." Megan kept her voice steady, her spine straight. Patricia's smile sharpened. "Of course you are. Though I must say, pregnancy certainly changes a woman." James always did appreciate elegance. The implication hung in the air like smoke. "You were never elegant enough. Now you're even less." Across the ballroom, James held court with tech executives and venture capitalists, his laughter carrying over the music. He looked every inch the visionary CEO in his custom Tom Ford suit, commanding attention with the ease of someone born into power and taught to wield it without mercy. Megan watched him lean in to hear something a young associate said, his hand resting casually on the woman's shoulder, his smile warm in a way it hadn't been for Megan in months. When had he stopped looking at her? When had she become invisible in her own marriage? "You know what your problem is, Megan?" James's younger brother appeared at her elbow, bourbon in hand, eyes glassy with expensive alcohol. "You take everything so seriously. Learn to laugh at yourself. Makes life easier." He reached out and patted her stomach like she was a pet, his hand lingering a second too long. "Besides, you locked him down, right? Mission accomplished." Megan stepped back, but he followed, leaning in close enough that she could smell the liquor on his breath. Relax. We're family now. She moved away without responding, her heart pounding against her ribs. Around her, conversations continued. Glasses clinked. The orchestra swelled into something triumphant. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever noticed. James found her near the terrace doors, where she had retreated to breathe air that didn't taste like champagne and contempt. For a moment, she thought he might apologize for his family, for the neglect, for the 1,000 small cruelties that had hollowed out their marriage. Instead, he glanced at his watch. We need to dance. People are watching. Not, are you okay? Not, I'm sorry. Just logistics, public relations, image management. They moved to the center of the ballroom, where space cleared for them automatically. James placed one hand on her waist, the other holding hers with the enthusiasm of someone handling a business obligation. The orchestra shifted into a waltz, and they began to move. Megan looked up at her husband, this man she had once loved with reckless abandon, and searched for any trace of the person who had promised her forever. She leaned forward, seeking connection, seeking anything that resembled intimacy. He jerked back like she had burned him. Don't. The word landed with the weight of a verdict. Around them, people slowed their own dancing, sensing drama. James's expression shifted from discomfort to disgust, his voice rising just loud enough to be heard by those nearby. Honestly, Megan, have some dignity. Her cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze, refusing to look away. He released her hand, stepping back as if distance could erase her existence. When he spoke again, his voice carried across the ballroom, amplified by marble walls and crystal fixtures designed to make every sound echo. I'd rather kiss a dog than kiss you. The ballroom held its breath for precisely 2 seconds, then the laughter began. First a ripple, then a wave, then a tsunami of sound that crashed over Megan from every direction. Cell phones appeared, angled toward her, recording her humiliation for social media immortality. James's mother smiled behind her wine glass. His brother raised his bourbon in a mock toast. And James just stood there, watching her drown, his expression empty of everything except faint annoyance. Megan felt the ground shift beneath her designer heels, the world tilting on an axis that had finally broken. 3 years of diminishing returns, of swallowing insults, of believing things would improve, collapsed into this single moment of absolute clarity. She would not cry. She would not run. She would not give them that satisfaction. Instead, she smiled. Not the practiced smile she wore like armor, but something sharper, something dangerous. You're right, James. Her voice cut through the dying laughter, clear and calm and devastating. A dog would show more loyalty. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. Ask me how I know about the offshore accounts. Ask me about the shell companies. Ask me what I found in your locked office drawer while you were busy kissing your associates. The color drained from his face. Megan turned and walked toward the exit, her head high, her hands steady, leaving behind 300 witnesses and one billionaire who had just realized he had underestimated his wife for the very last time. She pushed through the grand doors into the night air, finally allowing herself to breathe. Behind her, the ballroom buzzed with confusion and speculation. Ahead of her lay the systematic destruction of everything James Dooley had built on lies. Some prisons have golden bars. But Megan had just found the key. The drive home from the gala felt longer than usual, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows of the town car James had arranged. Separate cars, of course. He had stayed behind to smooth over the scene, to laugh off her comment about loyalty, to reassure his investors that his wife was simply hormonal, emotional, unstable. All the words men use when women refuse to stay silent. Megan sat in the back seat, one hand pressed against her belly, feeling the slight flutter of movement that had become familiar over the past few weeks. The baby kicked, as if responding to her racing heartbeat, reminding her that she was no longer just surviving for herself. 3 months ago, she hadn't planned on getting pregnant. They had been careful, or so she thought, until the morning she woke up nauseous and exhausted in a way that felt different from the usual depression that accompanied life as James Dooley's wife. The test had shown 2 pink lines, and her first emotion had been terror. She remembered standing in their marble bathroom, staring at the plastic stick, knowing that everything was about to change. not because a baby would bring them closer. She had stopped believing in fairy tales long ago. But because a child meant she was tied to James in a way divorce couldn't sever. A child meant his family would have leverage over her forever. A child meant she had 9 months to decide what kind of life she wanted to build, and for whom. When she told James, he had been in his home office, reviewing quarterly reports with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. He barely looked up. "Are you sure?" "I took 3 tests. Yes." He set down his pen, leaned back in his leather chair, and studied her with the same expression he wore when evaluating a potential acquisition. Calculating. Measuring value. Assessing risk. "Well, I suppose congratulations are in order." No embrace, no excitement. No questions about how she felt or what she needed. Just acknowledgement of a new variable in his carefully controlled existence. "My mother will want to plan an announcement," he said, already reaching for his phone. "We should coordinate with the PR team. This could be good timing, actually. SoftGen's board has been concerned about my commitment to legacy building." Legacy building, not family, not fatherhood. Just another strategic move in the endless game of accumulating power. Megan had left his office without another word, retreating to the guest bedroom where she had been sleeping for the past 6 months. She lay on the bed, hand on her still flat stomach, and cried for the child who would be born into this cold, calculated world. But something shifted in those tears. Something hardened. The town car pulled through the gates of their Bel Air estate, past manicured gardens maintained by a staff Megan barely knew. The house rose before her, all glass and steel and architectural awards, a monument to James's success that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Inside, silence greeted her. James wouldn't return for hours, if at all. He kept a suite at the downtown office building, a convenience he used more frequently as their marriage deteriorated. Megan climbed the stairs to her bedroom, her feet aching in heels she should have abandoned hours ago, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the evening. She had threatened him. In front of witnesses, she had hinted at knowledge that could destroy him. It had been reckless, impulsive, driven by humiliation and rage. But standing here now, hand pressed against the curve of her belly, she realized it had also been necessary. Because this child deserved better than what she had accepted for herself. Megan moved to the window overlooking the city, the lights of Los Angeles spreading out like scattered diamonds below. Somewhere in that sprawl were women who had left difficult marriages, who had chosen themselves over comfort, who had rebuilt their lives from nothing. She had read their stories in the early hours of morning when sleep wouldn't come, searching for proof that escape was possible. She had spent 3 years believing that love could heal James's coldness, that patience could thaw his cruelty, that if she just tried hard enough, sacrificed enough, diminished herself enough, he would finally see her as worthy. But pregnancy had stripped away that delusion with brutal efficiency. Every doctor's appointment she attended alone while James closed another deal. Every night she woke to an empty bed, knowing he was at the office or a hotel or in the arms of women who didn't demand emotional intimacy. Every interaction with his family that reminded her she would never be enough, would never belong, would never be anything more than the inconvenient wife who had trapped their golden son. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and Megan felt something crack open inside her chest. Not her heart breaking, something harder. Something that had been forming beneath the surface of her compliance, growing alongside the life she carried. Fury. Pure, clarifying, righteous fury at what James had stolen from her. Her confidence, her career, her sense of self. She had been a junior partner at a prestigious law firm when they met, building a reputation for meticulous contract analysis and aggressive negotiation. He had pursued her with the intensity of someone who viewed her success as a challenge to conquer, and she had been foolish enough to believe his interest was genuine. 6 months after their wedding, he suggested she step back from the firm. Focus on building their home, he said. Support his career, he said. Partners sacrifice for each other, he said. And she had agreed, believing it was temporary, believing he would reciprocate, believing the promises he made meant something. Now she stood in a house that would never be a home, carrying a child who would be born into a war zone, and she understood with perfect clarity that she had a choice to make. stay, and teach her child that love means enduring cruelty. That marriage means erasing yourself. That family means accepting humiliation as the price of security. Or leave. And show her child what it means to fight for dignity, to refuse a life built on lies, to choose hard truth over comfortable imprisonment. Megan turned from the window and walked to the closet, pulling out the locked box she kept hidden behind winter coats James had bought for ski trips she never enjoyed. Inside was a file folder she had been building for the past 3 months, ever since the morning she found James's private office door unlocked, and her curiosity finally overpowered her obedience. Bank statements from accounts he had never mentioned, emails discussing offshore holdings and shell corporations, transaction records that documented a pattern of financial manipulation that would make federal regulators salivate. She had photographed everything with shaking hands, hardly believing what she was uncovering, and compiled it all into evidence that could dismantle his empire brick by fraudulent brick. At the time, she had told herself she was just protecting herself, creating leverage in case divorce became necessary. But looking at those documents now, hand pressed against her growing belly, she understood the truth. She wasn't protecting herself. She was preparing for war. The baby kicked once more, and Megan felt tears slip down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness this time, but something fiercer. Something that tasted like freedom. "I'm going to get us out," she whispered to the child who couldn't hear her yet but would know her voice when they finally met. "I promise you. We're going to be free." Outside, the city glittered with possibility. Inside, Megan began planning the systematic destruction of everything James Dooley had built on lies, for the sake of the one person who deserved a future unburdened by his cruelty. Her child, their future, her redemption. The pregnancy had changed everything. Not because it made her weaker, as James and his family assumed, but because it made her unstoppable. The mistake was his, though he would never know it. James had left his private office unlocked on a Tuesday morning, rushing out to catch a flight to Singapore for merger negotiations that couldn't wait. Megan had been walking past with a cup of herbal tea, 6 weeks pregnant and battling morning sickness, when she noticed the door standing open for the first time in their marriage. She should have walked away, should have respected the boundary he had established with expensive locks and stern warnings about client confidentiality. But something made her pause. Some instinct that had been growing louder as her pregnancy progressed, whispering that survival required information. The office was pristine, all dark wood and leather, designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, a constant reminder of James's elevated position in the world. His desk held dual monitors, a fountain pen collection worth more than most cars, and a single framed photo of his parents at their estate in the Hamptons. No pictures of Megan. No wedding photos. No evidence that she existed in his professional life. She set down her tea and moved behind the desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. The computer was locked, but the filing cabinet beside it sat slightly open, as if someone had closed it in a hurry. Megan pulled the drawer fully open and found folders organized with military precision. Client contracts. Acquisition documents. Legal briefs she recognized from her own days practicing law. But tucked in the back, behind the legitimate files, was an unmarked folder sealed with a combination lock. The kind of security measure that screamed secrets worth protecting. Megan tried his birthday, their anniversary, his mother's maiden name. Nothing worked. She was about to give up when she remembered something Patricia had mentioned at a family dinner months ago, back when Megan still attended those torturous gatherings. James's childhood dog, a golden retriever named Titan, whose death had apparently been the only time anyone had seen the billionaire cry. The lock clicked open. Inside were documents that made her hands shake as she flipped through them. Bank statements from accounts registered in the Cayman Islands, listing deposits that dwarfed James's reported income. Wire transfer records showing millions moving through shell corporations with names like Pacific Holdings LLC and Meridian Capital Partners. Entities she had never heard him mention. But it was the emails that made her blood run cold. Printed communications between James and someone identified only as M.R., discussing the timing of stock purchases ahead of merger announcements. References to inside information and guaranteed returns that made it clear they were trading on privileged knowledge. Instructions to move funds through offshore accounts to avoid detection by the Securities and Exchange Commission. One email dated 6 months before their wedding made her stomach turn. The Technova acquisition is locked. Buy heavy before the announcement. We'll make $50M easy. Transfer through the usual channels. Make sure nothing traces back to primary accounts. Megan sat down hard in James's chair, the leather creaking beneath her weight. Her husband, the man she had married believing in his brilliance and business acumen, had built his empire on fraud. Every acquisition she had watched him celebrate, every deal he had closed with champagne and congratulations, had been rigged from the start. She thought about the investors who had lost money when James's competitors failed, the employees laid off when companies he had targeted went bankrupt, the retirement accounts that had vanished while James purchased another yacht, another property, another symbol of success built on other people's ruin. The baby kicked, a flutter of movement that brought her back to the present. She was sitting in a criminal's office, looking at evidence that could send him to federal prison for decades. And she was carrying his child. Megan pulled out her phone and began photographing every document in the folder. Page after page of transactions, emails, wire transfers, shell company registrations, evidence of insider trading that would make federal prosecutors salivate. Proof of money laundering through multiple jurisdictions designed to hide the source of his wealth. She worked methodically, her legal training kicking in despite her shaking hands. Document everything, maintain chain of custody, create redundant copies. These were lessons from her days building cases, now deployed against the man who had convinced her to abandon that career. When she finished, she returned everything to the folder exactly as she had found it, reset the combination lock, and closed the filing cabinet. The office looked undisturbed. No evidence of her intrusion. But everything had changed. Over the following weeks, Megan became a different person. She smiled at James over breakfast while mentally cataloging which documents she needed to find next. She attended his mother's charity luncheons and listened to Patricia boast about James's business genius, knowing it was all built on crimes that would destroy their family name. She lay in bed at night feeling the baby grow while researching federal sentencing guidelines for securities fraud. But information alone wasn't enough. She needed verification. Someone who could help her understand the full scope of James's criminal enterprise and build a case that would withstand legal scrutiny. Someone she could trust with secrets that could get her killed if the wrong people found out she knew. She found Marcus Trent through a former colleague at her old law firm, a woman who had moved into corporate investigations and specialized in financial crimes. Marcus was a forensic accountant who had worked cases for the FBI, untangling complex webs of fraud and following money trails through offshore accounts and shell corporations. They met at a coffee shop in Santa Monica, far from anywhere James or his associates might recognize her. Marcus was in his mid-50s, gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen every trick in the book. He listened while Megan explained what she had found, showing him photos on her phone, and she watched his expression shift from professional interest to genuine shock. "Mrs. Dooley, do you understand what you're showing me? Enough to know my husband belongs in prison." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her with the intensity of someone recalculating risk. "This is insider trading on a massive scale, money laundering across multiple jurisdictions. If even half of this is verified, we're talking about hundreds of millions in illegal profits. Federal prosecutors would build a statue in your honor for bringing them this case. I need you to verify all of it. I need documentation that will hold up in court, and I need to know who else is involved." "Why?" The question was gentle but pointed. "You could take this directly to the SEC right now. They would protect you as a whistleblower. You don't need more evidence." Megan placed her hand on her belly, where the bump was now visible beneath her loose clothing. "Because when I bring down his empire, I need to make sure it stays down. I need to know every account, every shell company, every accomplice. I need to dismantle it completely so that my child never has to live under the weight of his crimes." Marcus nodded slowly. "This will take time, and it won't be cheap. I have access to accounts he doesn't monitor closely. Consider it the first withdrawal from his criminal enterprise." They worked together over the next 3 months, meeting in coffee shops and library study rooms, places where a pregnant woman and a middle-aged accountant looked like unremarkable strangers. Marcus traced the money through offshore banks and shell corporations registered in Delaware and the British Virgin Islands. He identified the co-conspirators, including James's childhood friend, who ran a hedge fund, and a board member of Technova, who had fed James inside information for years. Each discovery felt like another betrayal, another layer of lies peeled back to reveal something uglier beneath. The man she had married didn't exist. He had never existed. There was only James Dooley, criminal mastermind who had built a billion-dollar empire by cheating, stealing, and manipulating every system designed to prevent exactly what he had done. But with each betrayal came clarity. With each piece of evidence Marcus verified came resolve. Megan was no longer the naive woman who had believed in fairy tales and redemption. She was someone harder now, forged by humiliation and sharpened by purpose. She was a mother preparing to protect her child, and she would burn down every lie James had built to do it. The truth about Patricia Dooley came in fragments, puzzle pieces Megan collected over weeks until the complete picture emerged in all its calculated cruelty. It started with a phone call she wasn't supposed to hear. Megan had returned home early from a prenatal appointment, 7 months pregnant and exhausted, to find Patricia in the living room speaking in hushed tones. The older woman didn't notice Megan standing in the doorway, hidden by the angle of the entrance hall. The pregnancy complicates things, but it's manageable, Patricia said into her phone, her voice carrying the same cold authority she used to dismiss servants. Once the child is born, we'll have more leverage. She won't leave if it means losing custody, and James certainly won't fight us on that front. Megan's hand went instinctively to her belly, her breath catching in her throat. No, she's already isolated. The firm partnership was easy enough to sabotage. A few well-placed calls questioning her commitment, hints about instability, concerns about her judgment. They withdrew the offer before she even knew it was on the table. Patricia laughed, a sound like ice cracking. She still thinks she stepped back voluntarily. It's almost touching how naive she is. The room tilted. Megan gripped the doorframe to steady herself, her mind racing back 3 years to the moment she had told James about the partnership offer. The prestigious position she had worked toward for 5 years. The culmination of countless hours building cases and winning clients. She had been so excited, so proud. James had smiled and ordered champagne, then suggested she think carefully about the commitment required. Partnership meant late nights, weekend work, constant pressure. Was that really what she wanted? Wouldn't it be better to focus on building their life together? At least for now. There would be other opportunities. She had agonized over the decision for weeks, ultimately declining the offer because she thought it was her choice. Because she believed she was choosing love over ambition, prioritizing their marriage over her career. But it had never been her choice at all. The prenup is airtight, Patricia continued, her voice drifting from the living room. Even if she tries to leave, she walks away with nothing. And once the child is born, we can easily build a case for sole custody if needed. Megan backed away from the doorway, moving silently up the stairs to her bedroom, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might wake the baby sleeping inside her. She locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what she had just heard. Patricia hadn't just disapproved of the marriage. She had orchestrated its failure from the beginning, systematically dismantling everything that made Megan independent, capable, threatening to the Dooley family's control over their golden son. Over the next few days, Megan began investigating, using the skills Marcus had taught her during their investigation of James's financial crimes. She created a fake social media profile and reached out to former colleagues at her old law firm, carefully asking questions about the partnership she had turned down. The responses painted a devastating picture. Her mentor at the firm, the partner who had championed her work, had received an anonymous complaint about Megan's conduct on a major case. The complaint suggested she had mishandled client communications and made errors that jeopardized the firm's reputation. Though the allegations were vague and ultimately unsubstantiated, they had been enough to raise questions about her judgment at a critical moment. The timing was unfortunate, her former mentor wrote back. The partnership committee was already nervous about making such a significant investment in someone so young. When those concerns surfaced, even though we couldn't verify them, it created doubt. I fought for you, but the votes weren't there. Megan traced the complaint back to its source, following digital breadcrumbs through email servers and corporate firewalls with Marcus's help. The trail led to a private investigator Patricia had hired, a man who specialized in corporate espionage and reputation management for wealthy families looking to protect their interests. But Patricia's manipulation hadn't stopped with Megan's career. Megan discovered emails between Patricia and James' younger brother discussing the Megan problem and strategies to diminish her influence. They detailed plans to exclude her from family gatherings where business was discussed, to undermine her opinions when she offered them, to systematically erase her presence from the Dooley family narrative until she was nothing more than a decorative accessory to James's success. She's already showing signs of isolation and depression. One email read, "Keep pushing. Eventually she'll either leave on her own, or she'll be so diminished that it won't matter if she stays. Either way, we maintain control." The pregnancy, according to Patricia's private correspondence with the family attorney, was an unforeseen complication but ultimately an opportunity. Once the child was born, the Dooleys would have hereditary claim to the next generation. They could position Megan as an unfit mother, unstable and unable to provide the life a Dooley heir deserved. With their resources and connections, securing custody would be a formality. Megan had thought James was the source of her misery, the cold, cruel husband who had stopped loving her. But James was just a product of Patricia's creation, molded from childhood to value power over people, success over connection, family legacy over individual happiness. The entire Dooley clan operated like a corporation, with Patricia as CEO and every family member playing their assigned role. James was the public face, the charming billionaire who closed deals and collected accolades. His brother was the enforcer, managing threats and eliminating obstacles. And Megan was supposed to be the compliant wife who provided heirs and never questioned the system. But they had made a critical error in their calculations. They had assumed Megan would break under the weight of their manipulation. That isolation would make her desperate, depression would make her compliant, and the pregnancy would trap her permanently in their gilded cage. Instead, their cruelty had forged something harder. Someone who understood exactly what she was fighting and why. Megan sat in her bedroom, surrounded by printed emails and documented evidence of a conspiracy that had stolen 3 years of her life, and felt something cold settle into her bones. Not sadness, not fear. Clarity. Patricia wanted to use the baby as leverage. Megan would use their crimes as a weapon. They wanted to paint her as unstable and unfit. She would expose them as criminals and conspirators. They thought she was isolated and powerless. They had no idea she had spent months building a case that would destroy everything they had sacrificed her happiness to protect. Megan picked up her phone and called Marcus. "I need to know everything about Patricia Dooley's financial connections to James's empire," she said without preamble. "Shell companies, joint accounts, anything that proves she knew about the fraud and benefited from it." "You want to bring down the whole family?" Marcus sounded surprised but not disapproving. "I want to make sure that when James' empire falls, it buries everyone who helped build it on lies." Megan's hand rested on her belly, where the baby kicked as if in agreement. "Especially the people who thought I was too weak to fight back. That's going to take some time. Patricia's careful about keeping her name off official documents. We have time. I'm not due for another 2 months, and I'm not making a move until after the baby is born safely." Megan looked at the evidence spread across her bed. Years of manipulation and betrayal documented in black and white. "But when I do move, I want to make sure none of them see it coming." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You know this means war, not just with James, but with one of the most powerful families in the country. They have resources, connections, lawyers who could tie you up in court for decades. Then it's lucky I have evidence of federal crimes that will send them to prison before their lawyers can file the first motion." Megan's voice was steady, certain. "They wanted to take my child and use this pregnancy as a cage. Instead, they gave me a reason to burn down everything they've built." She hung up and looked out the window at the perfectly manicured gardens, the swimming pool that cost more than most houses, the gate that kept the world out and trapped her inside. Not for much longer. Patricia had orchestrated Megan's isolation, believing loneliness would make her controllable. But isolation had given Meghan space to think, to plan, to build a case that would shatter the Dooley dynasty. The betrayal ran deeper than Meghan had imagined, but so did her resolve. The first crack appeared in the Wall Street Journal. James was reading the morning paper over coffee in his downtown office when he saw the headline buried on page 12. Anonymous sources raise questions about Dooley acquisitions. The article was carefully worded, legally vetted, nothing actionable. But it asked uncomfortable questions about the timing of his trades, the patterns of his success, the remarkable consistency with which he predicted market movements ahead of his competitors. He tossed the paper aside and called his legal team. Probably a disgruntled competitor, they assured him. Someone jealous of his success. It would blow over in a news cycle. But it didn't blow over. 3 days later, Bloomberg published a deeper analysis examining shell corporations connected to Dooley Enterprises, noting the unusual structure of offshore accounts and questioning why a legitimate business empire needed such complex financial architecture. The article stopped short of allegations, but the implications were clear enough to make his board members nervous. James held an emergency meeting with his top executives, projecting confidence he was starting not to feel. Market speculation, he told them. Competitors spreading rumors to tank their stock price. They needed to present a united front, demonstrate transparency, maybe release some carefully curated financial statements to reassure investors. His chief financial officer, a man who had been with the company since the beginning, asked the question James had been dreading. Is there anything we need to be concerned about? Any exposure we should know about? Nothing, James said, meeting his eyes without flinching. Our books are clean. It was a lie he had told so many times it almost felt true. The stock price dipped 5% that week. Not catastrophic, but enough to catch the attention of institutional investors who started asking pointed questions during earnings calls. James handled them with his usual charm, deflecting concerns with humor and confidence. But he felt something shifting beneath his feet, like standing on ground that was less solid than it appeared. At home, Meghan moved through their mansion like a ghost, her pregnancy now in its 9th month, her belly enormous beneath loose clothing that couldn't hide her condition. James barely looked at her anymore. She had become a problem he would deal with after the baby arrived, after his business troubles settled, after everything returned to normal. But normal was slipping further away every day. The Securities and Exchange Commission sent a letter requesting documents related to his Technova acquisition. Routine inquiry, his lawyer said. Nothing to worry about. But James had built his empire on reading between lines, and he knew what routine inquiries could become if someone started pulling threads. He spent a night going through his private files, checking the locks on his office safe, making sure everything that needed to stay hidden remained buried. The offshore accounts were structured through multiple layers of shell corporations. The insider trading was coordinated through encrypted communications that had been deleted years ago. He had been careful. He had always been careful. But careful men still made mistakes. Patricia called him into her office at the family compound, a room that still smelled like his father's cigars despite the old man being dead for 5 years. She sat behind the massive desk that had intimidated James as a child and still carried weight as an adult. The media attention is problematic, she said without preamble. We've worked too hard building this family's reputation to have it undermined by speculation and rumors. I'm handling it. Are you? Patricia's eyes were cold, calculating. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like someone is conducting a very deliberate campaign to damage your credibility. The timing of these articles, the specificity of the questions, suggests access to information that should be confidential. James felt a chill run down his spine. You think someone's leaking? I think someone knows more than they should. And I think we need to identify who that person is before they do more damage. Patricia leaned forward, her hands folded on the desk. Have you considered that it might be someone close to you? His mind went immediately to his inner circle. Business partners, board members, executives who had access to sensitive information. He started mentally cataloging who might have motive, opportunity, the courage to betray him. He never once thought of Meghan. His wife was barely a presence in his life anymore, relegated to the role of incubator for his heir. a problem to be managed after more pressing concerns were addressed. She had no access to his business, no understanding of financial structures, no network of contacts who could help her build a case against him. She was just Megan, emotional, isolated, increasingly irrelevant to the empire he had built. That night, he returned to their estate to find her in the nursery, folding tiny clothes with methodical precision. The room was painted a soft blue, decorated with expensive furniture that Patricia had selected without consulting Megan. His mother had taken control of every detail of the baby's arrival, from the nursery design to the pediatrician selection, treating Megan like an inconvenient vessel rather than the child's mother. "We need to talk about after," James said from the doorway, not entering the space that felt too intimate, too domestic for his comfort. Megan looked up, her face unreadable. "After what?" "After the baby. My mother thinks it would be best if we maintained separate residences for a while. Give you time to recover. Give me space to handle the business situation. It would be temporary, of course." Translation: Patricia wanted to separate Megan from the child, establish custody patterns that would favor the Dooley family, begin the process of erasing her from their lives. Megan folded another impossibly small onesie, her movements slow and deliberate. "And what do you think?" The question caught him off guard. He couldn't remember the last time she had asked his opinion about anything, or the last time he had considered hers. Their marriage had become a series of logistics, arrangements made by other people, decisions handed down from Patricia and executed without discussion. "I think it makes sense," he said finally. "Considering everything." "Everything meaning your collapsing empire?" The words landed like a slap. James stared at his wife, this woman he had stopped seeing months ago, and noticed for the first time the steel in her eyes. "What did you say?" "Your stock price is falling. The SEC is investigating. The press is asking questions you can't answer. Your empire is collapsing, James. Considering everything." Megan set down the laundry and met his gaze directly. "You can send me away after the baby is born. You can let your mother orchestrate whatever custody arrangement she thinks serves the family best. But it won't save you." He felt anger rising, that familiar heat that came when people challenged him, questioned his judgment, refused to fall in line. "You don't know anything about my business. I know enough." She stood, one hand braced against her lower back, her pregnant belly prominent between them. "I know that empires built on lies eventually fall. I know that men who treat people like they're disposable eventually find themselves alone. And I know that you never once asked yourself if maybe, just maybe, the person destroying your reputation might be someone you underestimated." The room felt too small, the air too thin. James looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in months, and saw something that made his blood run cold. Not defeat, not desperation, not the broken woman he had expected. Certainty. "What did you do?" The question came out quieter than he intended, almost a whisper. Megan smiled, a small expression that didn't reach her eyes. "I learned from the best. You taught me that power goes to whoever is willing to be ruthless, that success belongs to those who plan ahead, that empire builders do whatever it takes to win." She walked past him toward the door, moving with surprising grace despite her condition. "The difference between us is that I know when to stop building and start burning things down." James stood in the nursery surrounded by tiny clothes and expensive furniture, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet in a way that had nothing to do with market speculation or media scrutiny. For the first time in his carefully constructed life, he realized he might have miscalculated something crucial. Not a business deal or a market position or a corporate strategy, but the woman he had dismissed as irrelevant might be the one person capable of destroying everything. The baby came 3 days later, a boy they named after James's father, as Patricia had insisted. Megan spent 48 hours in labor, enduring contractions alone, while James paced the hospital corridor, making business calls, managing the crisis that continued to unfold across financial news networks. When she finally held her son, his tiny fingers wrapped around hers, she felt something crystallize inside her chest. Not just love, though that came fierce and immediate, but certainty, absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. They brought the baby home to the estate on a Tuesday morning. Patricia had arranged for a night nurse and a daytime nanny, support staff to ensure Megan's incompetence wouldn't endanger the dually heir. James appeared long enough to take photos for social media, then disappeared back into his office to fight the fires consuming his empire. Megan spent a week recovering, nursing her son, and waiting for the right moment. It came on a Thursday evening when James returned home earlier than usual, his face haggard, his expensive suit rumpled in a way that would have been unthinkable months ago. She found him in his private office, the one she had broken into months earlier, the scene of her first discovery. He sat behind his desk, staring at computer screens filled with red numbers, his empire bleeding value in real time. "We need to talk," Megan said from the doorway. He didn't look up. "Not now. I have a board meeting in an hour." "Cancel it." Something in her voice made him pause. He looked up finally, and she saw exhaustion etched into features that had once radiated confidence. The unshakable billionaire had been shaken, and cracks were showing everywhere. "Megan, I don't have time for whatever domestic drama you want to discuss. The SEC has expanded their investigation. My stock price has dropped 20% in a week. I need to focus." She walked into the office and closed the door behind her, then reached into her bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She placed it on his desk with deliberate care, right on top of the quarterly reports he had been reviewing. "What's this?" "Your confession." James stared at the envelope, not touching it, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion. "What are you talking about?" Megan sat down in the leather chair across from his desk, the one reserved for business partners and corporate executives, places she had never been invited to occupy. "Open it." He did, slowly, pulling out the documents she and Marcus had compiled over 4 months. Bank statements from offshore accounts, wire transfer records through shell corporations, emails discussing insider trading strategies, transaction histories showing millions in illegal profits. She watched the color drain from his face as he flipped through page after page, his hands beginning to shake. "Where did you get this?" His voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "From your office. The filing cabinet you thought was secure. The computer you forgot to fully encrypt. The business partners who kept records you didn't know existed." Megan kept her voice steady, calm. The same tone she had used in court years ago when presenting evidence to a jury. "I've spent 4 months building a case against you, James. Every transaction traced, every shell company identified, every co-conspirator documented." He looked up from the documents, his eyes wide with something she had never seen there before. "Fear. You had no right. I had every right. I'm your wife. I live in this house built with stolen money. I wear clothes purchased with illegal profits. My son will inherit a name connected to federal crimes." She leaned forward, her hands folded on the desk. "But more importantly, I'm a lawyer, and lawyers have a responsibility to report crimes when they discover them." James stood abruptly, the chair rolling back and hitting the bookshelf behind him. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't destroy your own life. The prenup means you get nothing in a divorce. You'd be exposing your son to public scandal. You'd be throwing away everything we've built. Everything you built on fraud, you mean?" Megan remained seated, projecting calm she had practiced for this exact moment. "And I'm not bluffing. That envelope contains copies. The originals are with my attorney, along with instructions to deliver them to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Department of Justice, and every major news outlet, if I don't check in with him every 72 hours. You're insane." But his voice lacked conviction. "I'm thorough. I learned from you." Megan pulled out her phone and opened the voice memo app, showing him the recording interface. "This conversation is being documented. Everything you say from this point forward becomes additional evidence." James sank back into his chair, his face ashen. He looked at the documents spread across his desk, then at his wife, as if seeing her clearly for the first time in their marriage. "What do you want?" "Full custody of our son. A divorce settlement that voids the prenup and gives me $50 million. A signed confession that you coerced me into leaving my law career. And a public statement acknowledging the emotional abuse." Megan's voice remained steady, each demand delivered with the precision of a contract negotiation. "50 million? You're out of your mind. Your empire is worth $1.2 billion, built almost entirely on insider trading and embezzlement. $50 million is a bargain for avoiding federal prison. She stood, placing both hands on his desk and leaning forward. Here's what happens if you refuse. I deliver everything to the SEC tomorrow morning. They freeze your assets within 48 hours. The DOJ files criminal charges within a week. You're looking at 25 years in federal prison for securities fraud alone, plus additional time for money laundering. No jury would convict me. I have the best lawyers money can buy. You have lawyers who can delay, who can create reasonable doubt, who can exploit technicalities. Megan shook her head. But you don't have lawyers who can make this evidence disappear. Every transaction is documented. Every email is saved. Every co-conspirator will turn on you the moment the FBI comes knocking, because that's what criminals do when facing decades in prison. James looked down at the documents, his expression crumbling. I gave you everything. A home, security, a lifestyle most people can only dream about. You gave me a prison with marble floors. Megan's voice hardened. You isolated me from my career. Your mother sabotaged my professional reputation. Your family treated me like an inconvenience, and you humiliated me in front of 300 people while I was pregnant with your child. You gave me nothing except reasons to want you destroyed. So this is about revenge? This is about justice, and protection, and making sure my son grows up knowing his mother fought for his future instead of accepting his father's cruelty. She straightened, putting distance between them. You have until Monday morning to make a decision. Accept my terms, sign the papers my attorney will deliver, and I keep your criminal enterprise quiet. Your empire crumbles slowly through bad press and poor decisions, but you avoid prison. You get to rebuild, maybe even recover eventually. And if I refuse, then I burn it all down. Every account exposed, every co-conspirator named, every crime documented in federal filings that will be public record forever. Your mother goes down with you, by the way. Marcus traced her connection to several shell corporations. She knew about the fraud and profited from it. That makes her an accomplice. James closed his eyes, his hands pressed flat against the desk, as if he needed the physical contact to keep from falling apart. I could make you disappear. People with my resources can make problems disappear. Then you'd better hope those resources include time travel. Megan pulled out a second phone from her bag. Because the documents are already in motion. My attorney has a dead man's switch. If I miss a single check-in, everything goes public automatically. And there are people watching me now, James. People who would notice if something happened to the whistleblower who could take down a billionaire. She moved toward the door, her hand on the handle. I loved you, James said, his voice breaking. Megan looked back at him. This man who had promised her forever and delivered nothing but pain. Then you should have acted like it. Love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't isolate. Love doesn't build empires on lies while destroying the person who trusted you most. Our son will hate you for this. Our son will thank me for teaching him that power without integrity is just cruelty wearing expensive suits, that empires built on fraud eventually fall, and that sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is fight for her child's future, even when it means burning down the past. She opened the door, pausing in the threshold. Monday morning, James. My attorney's office at 9. Bring a pen and whatever dignity you have left. And if I choose prison over giving you what you want? Megan smiled, cold and certain. Then I'll raise our son to understand that justice matters more than money, that doing the right thing sometimes costs everything, and that his father chose pride over family. She closed the door behind her, leaving James alone with the evidence of his crimes spread across the desk like an autopsy report. Behind her, she heard something crash against the wall. Probably an expensive vase or award or symbol of success built on lies. She didn't look back. In the nursery, her son slept peacefully in his designer crib, unaware that his mother had just offered his father a choice between destruction and devastation. Megan picked up the baby monitor and walked to her bedroom, the room she would leave within days regardless of James's decision. The confrontation was over. The power had shifted completely. Now she just had to wait and see if James would choose survival or stubbornness. Either way, she had already won. Monday morning came. James didn't show up at the attorney's office. By Monday afternoon, Megan's attorney activated the dead man's switch. Within an hour, encrypted files containing 4 months of meticulously documented evidence arrived simultaneously at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Department of Justice, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg News, and CNBC. By Tuesday morning, James's empire was in freefall. The Wall Street Journal broke the story first, their headline brutal in its simplicity. Dooley Enterprises, built on massive securities fraud, evidence suggests. The article detailed offshore accounts, shell corporations, and insider trading schemes that had generated hundreds of millions in illegal profits over a decade. They cited anonymous sources who had provided thousands of pages of documentation, every transaction verified by forensic accountants who had reviewed the materials. James's stock price dropped 40% before trading was halted. By Tuesday afternoon, the SEC had frozen all accounts connected to Dooley Enterprises pending investigation. Federal agents arrived at his office building with search warrants, removing boxes of documents while news cameras captured every moment. James's attorney released a statement denying all allegations and calling the evidence fabricated, but his words were drowned out by the mounting tsunami of revelations. Bloomberg published emails showing coordination between James and board members at Technova, proving insider knowledge had preceded his acquisition announcement. CNBC ran hour-long specials analyzing the complex web of shell companies designed to hide the source of his wealth. Financial analysts who had once praised James's business acumen now competed to explain how they had missed the warning signs. Megan watched it all unfold from a hotel suite in Santa Monica, her son sleeping peacefully in a portable crib beside her bed. She had left the estate the morning she sent the evidence, taking only what she could carry and leaving behind every symbol of the life she had tried to build with James. The designer clothes, the expensive jewelry, the luxury car in the driveway, all of it purchased with stolen money. None of it worth keeping. Her phone rang constantly with calls from reporters seeking comment, but she ignored them all. This wasn't about revenge or public vindication. This was about justice and protection and showing her son that some things mattered more than comfort. By Wednesday, the Department of Justice announced formal criminal charges: securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The indictment named James as the primary defendant but also charged 3 of his business partners and, in a development that made Megan's hands shake as she read the news, Patricia Dooley, the matriarch who had orchestrated so much cruelty, who had sabotaged Megan's career and plotted to steal her child, was being perp-walked into federal court in handcuffs. News footage showed Patricia's face, pale and drawn, stripped of the imperious authority that had intimidated everyone around her for decades. She looked small, human, vulnerable in a way Megan had never imagined possible. The media frenzy intensified. Cable news ran continuous coverage, featuring interviews with former employees who described James's ruthless business tactics, investors who had lost millions in his schemes, and financial experts who estimated the total fraud at over $800 million. Social media erupted with reactions, most expressing outrage at the billionaire who had stolen from ordinary people while living in obscene luxury. A few voices defended James, claiming he was being targeted by a vindictive system that punished success. But those voices were drowned out by the overwhelming evidence and the growing chorus of victims coming forward with their own stories of losses connected to his criminal enterprise. By Thursday, James's board of directors had voted unanimously to remove him as CEO. His business partners were scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal, filing lawsuits claiming they had been deceived by his accounting practices. His social circle evaporated overnight, wealthy friends suddenly unable to return calls or remember invitations to exclusive events they had once competed to attend. Megan received a single text message from James on Thursday evening, 3 words that carried the weight of everything he had lost. "You destroyed me." She stared at the message for a long time, her son sleeping peacefully against her chest, his tiny heartbeat steady and trusting. Then, she typed her response. "You destroyed yourself. I just provided the evidence." She blocked his number and returned her attention to the baby, this perfect creature who would never know his father outside prison walls, who would grow up with questions about his last name that Megan would answer honestly when he was old enough to understand. By Friday, Authorities had traced additional crimes, tax evasion spanning years, bribery of local officials to secure development permits, environmental violations covered up through shell companies and strategic donations to regulatory oversight boards. Each revelation added to the mounting case against James and his family, building toward a prosecution that would dominate headlines for years. The Dooley empire, built over 3 generations and valued at over $1 billion a week ago, was being systematically dismantled. Properties seized. Accounts frozen. Assets liquidated to compensate victims and fund the investigation. Everything James had worked for, everything his family had sacrificed to protect, was disappearing like smoke. Marcus called her Friday evening with an update. "The feds want to talk to you. You're the whistleblower who brought them the case. They're offering protection, immunity, potential financial rewards under whistleblower statutes." "I don't want money from this," Megan said, watching her son yawn and stretch in his sleep. "I just wanted to stop them from hurting anyone else." "You did more than stop them. You buried them." Marcus sounded impressed despite himself. "The prosecutors are saying this could be the biggest financial fraud case in a decade. James is looking at minimum 25 years in federal prison. Patricia is facing similar charges. The whole family is going down." Megan felt something twist in her chest. Not regret, exactly, but awareness of the magnitude of what she had set in motion. Thousands of employees would lose jobs as the company collapsed. Investors would lose money despite eventual restitution. Families connected to the Dooley name would face public shame and financial ruin. But staying silent would have meant allowing the crimes to continue. Meant teaching her son that power justified cruelty, that wealth excused theft, that family loyalty mattered more than justice. "I'll cooperate with whatever the prosecutors need," she said finally. "But I'm not doing interviews or making statements. This isn't about me becoming famous for bringing down a billionaire. They'll respect that." "And Megan?" Marcus paused. "You saved a lot of people from future harm. The pension funds invested in his company, the employees whose retirement accounts were tied to fraudulent stock prices, the competitors he would have destroyed with insider information. What you did took courage." She hung up and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean visible from her hotel suite. Somewhere across the city, James was huddled with lawyers trying to construct a defense that wouldn't exist. Patricia was facing the reality that her carefully built dynasty had collapsed in less than a week. The Dooley family was scattered and panicking, watching their empire burn. Megan felt tired but not triumphant. This wasn't a victory so much as a necessary ending. She had walked away from the wreckage carrying only her son and her integrity. Everything else, all the material, comfort and social status and financial security, had been built on lies too fragile to survive exposure to truth. Her phone buzzed with another call from a reporter. She ignored it, settling into the chair beside the window and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Her son stirred in her arms, his eyes opening briefly before closing again, content and safe. Outside, the world continued turning. James's empire continued crumbling. Federal investigations continued expanding. But inside this hotel room, in this moment, Megan had exactly what mattered. Her child, her freedom, her future. The cost had been enormous, but some things were worth any price. 6 months after James's arrest, Megan stood in a converted warehouse in downtown Los Angeles, watching contractors put finishing touches on what would become the headquarters of New Horizons Foundation. The name had come to her during a sleepless night feeding her son, thinking about all the women trapped in marriages like hers, convinced they had no options, no future beyond the prison their relationships had become. The Foundation's mission was simple but comprehensive: provide survivors of domestic and financial abuse with legal support, career counseling, housing assistance, and financial literacy training. Everything Megan had lost when she married James, packaged into programs designed to help women rebuild their independence. She had funded it with the whistleblower reward from the SEC, a sum that made her uncomfortable, but that Marcus convinced her to accept. "You earned it by bringing down criminals," he had said. "Now use it to help their victims." The settlement from James had helped too. though extracting money from frozen assets had required months of legal wrangling. Eventually, a judge had agreed that Megan deserved compensation for the career she had been coerced into abandoning, the reputation sabotage Patricia had orchestrated, and the emotional abuse she had endured. The $50 million she had originally demanded became $30 million after legal fees and negotiations, but it was more than enough to build something meaningful. "The legal clinic is ready," said Rachel Monroe, the former prosecutor Megan had hired as executive director. Rachel had spent 15 years handling domestic violence cases and had jumped at the opportunity to help survivors on a larger scale. "We've already received 43 applications for services, and we haven't even officially opened." Megan adjusted her son on her hip, his weight familiar and grounding. He was 9 months old now, healthy and happy, completely unaware that his father was awaiting trial in federal detention. She had started the legal process to change his last name, removing the Dooley brand that carried so much toxic history. "What about the housing program?" Megan asked, reviewing the checklist on her tablet. "We have 12 transitional apartments ready, 6-month leases, fully furnished, with wraparound services including childcare assistance and job placement support. The women can focus on rebuilding without worrying about rent or basic necessities." Rachel smiled. "You've created something extraordinary here, Megan." The media attention had been intense but manageable. Megan had given exactly 2 interviews, both focused on the foundation rather than her personal story. She spoke about financial abuse as a form of domestic violence, about how economic control trapped women in dangerous situations, about the importance of career independence and financial literacy. The response had been overwhelming. Donations flooded in from women who had survived similar situations, from allies who recognized the systemic nature of abuse, from corporations looking to support meaningful change. Within 3 months, New Horizons had raised enough additional funding to expand into 3 more cities. "Miss Engler," a young woman approached hesitantly, one of the survivors enrolled in their pilot program, "I just wanted to thank you. The legal team helped me get custody of my daughter, and the career counseling helped me land a job that actually pays enough to support us. I never thought I'd feel safe again, but you made that possible." Megan felt tears prick her eyes. This was why she had done it. Not revenge, though destroying James's empire had felt like justice. Not money, though the settlement provided security. But this, the chance to transform her suffering into something that helped others escape similar traps. "You made it possible," Megan corrected gently. "You were brave enough to leave, to ask for help, to believe you deserved better. We just provided resources. The courage was always yours." Her phone buzzed with a message from her attorney. James wanted to schedule a prison visit, wanted to see his son, wanted to apologize for everything. The message included a handwritten letter that his lawyer had scanned and sent. Megan deleted it without reading. Some doors, once closed, needed to stay that way. James had made his choices. He had chosen cruelty over kindness, control over partnership, empire over family. Now he was living with the consequences of those decisions, just as Megan was living with the consequences of hers. The difference was that her consequences looked like freedom. "Are you ready for the opening ceremony tomorrow?" Rachel asked, joining Megan near the window overlooking the city. "The mayor is coming. So are several city council members and representatives from other organizations doing similar work. You'll need to give a speech." Megan took a breath, feeling the weight of what she had built and what it represented. A year ago, she had been standing in a ballroom being publicly humiliated, convinced her life was ending. Now she stood in a space dedicated to helping women begin again, holding her son, financially independent, emotionally whole. "I'm ready," she said. The next morning, Megan stood at a podium in front of 200 people, her son with a trusted babysitter nearby, and told a version of her story edited for purpose rather than detail. "I married someone who promised me partnership but delivered isolation, someone who used wealth as a cage and power as a weapon. I lost my career, my confidence, and nearly lost myself. But I didn't lose my ability to fight back." She paused, meeting eyes in the crowd. "New Horizons exists because too many women believe they have no options, because financial abuse is domestic violence, Because leaving requires resources that most survivors don't have access to. We're changing that. One woman at a time. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. News outlets recorded every word for evening broadcasts. But Megan focused on the front row, where 10 survivors sat wearing New Horizons t-shirts, women who had completed the program and were starting new chapters. Their faces, lit with hope and determination, reflected the journey Megan herself had traveled. After the ceremony, she found a quiet corner and called Marcus. The foundation is officially open. We're already scheduling intake appointments for next week. You should be proud. You took something terrible and created something that will help thousands of people. Marcus sounded genuinely moved. Not many people would have had the strength to do what you did. I had no choice. Staying meant teaching my son that cruelty was acceptable, that power justified abuse, that money mattered more than dignity. Megan watched through the window as her son played with blocks in the children's area they had designed for visiting families. He deserves to grow up knowing that his mother fought for something that mattered. She hung up and went to her son, scooping him into her arms. He giggled and grabbed at her hair, innocent and joyful, untouched by the darkness that had surrounded his conception and early months. James would stand trial in 3 months. Patricia was negotiating a plea deal. The Dooley empire had been dismantled and sold off in pieces, the proceeds going to victim restitution funds and legal penalties. The dynasty that had ruled Los Angeles society for generations was finished, remembered now only for the fraud that had fueled its rise. But Megan was building something new, something clean, something that would bear her name and represent strength rather than stolen wealth. She looked around the foundation headquarters, at the legal clinic where survivors would find representation, at the classrooms where financial literacy would be taught, at the offices where career counselors would help women rebuild professional lives. This was redemption, not forgiveness for James, but transformation of her own suffering into something that prevented others from enduring similar pain. Her son reached for a toy, and Megan handed it to him, watching his face light up with simple happiness. He would grow up knowing his mother as someone who fought back, who refused to accept cruelty, who built something meaningful from the ruins of a broken marriage. He would never know the woman she had been at that gala, frozen and humiliated while people laughed. He would only know the woman she had become, standing tall and independent, holding him close while building a future that honored strength over submission. Outside the window, Los Angeles stretched toward the horizon, full of women who needed exactly what New Horizons offered, full of stories waiting to be rewritten, full of futures waiting to be claimed. Megan had claimed hers. Now she would help others do the same. Some cages have golden bars, but every cage has a key. And Megan had not only found hers, she had turned it into a blueprint for others to follow. The story that began with public humiliation ended with public purpose. The woman who had been dismissed as irrelevant became a symbol of resilience. The marriage built on lies became the foundation for truth. Megan stood in her foundation's headquarters, holding her son, surrounded by evidence of everything she had built from the ashes of everything she had lost. She had won, not because she had destroyed James, though his empire lay in ruins, but because she had reclaimed herself. And that victory was worth more than any fortune built on fraud. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.